So question 3 asked me to go back to the Romantic era, which I'd love to, and just to describe the poetical principles that Wordsworth describes in his preface to the Lyrical Ballads, and then how a couple of his poems on my list demonstrate these principles. And so, just to start off, going back to the preface and some of his big poetic principles that he talks about. One of those is the source of a poem was not in outer nature, but in the psychology of the individual poet. So a lot of it comes internally by outside factors. All good poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. That's a big quote from it. The origins of a poem came from the mind, emotions, and imaginations of the poet. Poetry is the real language of men, and the poet is a man speaking to men. So those are a couple of like the big talking points in the preface and that you see throughout Wordsworth's poetry. And so one detail I like to always talk about is he wasn't necessarily fond of the I know I talked in one of Dr. Barbati's questions about how there's kind of a duality to the Romantic era of the Enlightenment and also just kind of like the melancholy aspects as well. And so I don't really think Wordsworth was the biggest fan of the more the sublime and melancholy aspects of it that you might see in some of the other poets of this time. Most especially from his good friend and collaborator Samuel Coleridge, who he actually almost omitted him from the second edition of their joint Lyrical Ballads in the 1800 version. So he almost cut out Rhyme of Ancient Mariner and a few other poems, but even then he gave kind of a note on Rhyme of Ancient Mariner and saying like why this was included, and I think is probably most certainly because of just their growing popularity and how other people viewed the poems. But for my Wordsworth selections, where you can really see, his idea of what romantic poetry should be and just poetry in general should be. So Tintern Abbey, probably one of Wordsworth's most well-known works. You see the picturesque landscape that he creates of Tintern Abbey and the raw emotions that place brings forth in Wordsworth of his childhood, of his current state. It is a place that he draws upon like inspiration when he's not there. He's just the memory of it is just stays with him. And you also have like the time sequence. It kind of goes the time stop. It kind of he's there and he goes back in time to when he was thinking about it, and he is present again. And so in that you get you truly get an outpouring of emotions from Wordsworth himself, and you can see his childhood attachment and the imagination that he uses, that he contributes also just to the world he's looking at. So that's a really big one. And another one is in We Are Seven. The narrator speaks to a young child and tries to explain to her just the concept of death. He doesn't think that she completely understands it. And the narrator actually leaves the conversation convinced, or maybe not convinced, but pretty confused about his own beliefs after hearing the child's way of viewing death. And not any kind of, crazy, lofty language was used, especially not like language you'll see in, maybe some of Byron or Shelley. It's just the true feelings and imaginations of a child that really made the narrator stop in his tracks and rethink it. Expostulation and Reply is about two young boys, one attached to nature and the other to books. The boy who loves nature tries to let the other boy know that there is so much more to be learned just from the world around them, and that nature should be their teacher. And so the poem more so reflects characteristics of the whole era, but definitely echoes Wordsworth's statements in the preface, and just that just the emotions that should come behind poetry, the everyday life that it should depict. I mean, nothing that Wordsworth really, writes about is huge, epic stories. It's, I know Michael is about just a father and his wife and losing their son, and it's tragic, and it's like everyday, scenes, but he tells it in a way that's eloquent still without being lofty. And you can definitely see the vibration he made throughout literature, and even within the era, even if it did kind of go back and forth on him. But